guys, Bláithín here from A Style of Living. So I'm going to do another cook with me today, and today I'm going to be baking the easiest scones ever. Scones are one of those things that actually took me a long time to perfect, and I'm going to share with you three reasons. Mine were always like tiny 1 centimeter crumbly messes. The most important things when baking scones are the temperature of your oven, the temperature of your butter or margarine, and the size that you sort of roll your dough or scone mix out to before you cut it with your cookie cutters. You want to have a really, really hot oven. So most of the recipes I was using or looking at when I was first trying to bake scones always seemed to have a temperature indication of 180 to 200 degrees Celsius. And I was talking about this with my mum, who is a master baker, and she suggested the best thing to do is to actually almost turn your oven up to 220 or even 250 in some cases, and let it preheat so that it's really, really nice and hot, and then you can turn it down to about 220 for the actual baking of the scones. And I have to say that one tip alone made a major difference in my baking scones, and that gave them a nice rise, nice color, and they were no longer this crumbly mess that just fell apart as soon as you went to cook them. The next thing is to do with your margarine or butter, and it's very important to bring that to room temperature before you use it. Now, I didn't know this, but it can take 1 to 2 hours for butter or margarine to come to room temperature in sort of sufficiently once you take it out of the fridge. So something to bear in mind, that when you do intend on baking, you almost need to sort of preempt that, unless of course you're one of these people who leaves theirs in a butter dish on the counter, then you're golden. The next thing is, as I mentioned, is to do with size, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about that when we're actually cutting the scone mixture out. But first, let me share with you today's ingredients. As I mentioned, this is a really easy recipe, and as you can see, does not contain a lot of ingredients at all. Basically, it is milk, butter, flour and salt. Now, I personally prefer to use plain flour and add in the baking powder as opposed to the self-raising flour, but you do you. As you can possibly guess by the presence of the raisins, I'm going to make these fruit scones, but if you'd rather have them plain, you just omit the raisins. Very, very simple. Now, there are some recipes that include caster sugar, and I used to use it, to be honest, but what I noticed is when you add the caster sugar, which is often optional in a recipe, I found that my scones were a little bit grittier. Didn't make them worse, they're just a tiny bit grittier, especially when you go to cut them. And one of the things that we're trying to do in our family is cut down on excess sugar where we can. I have PCOS, which is an insulin sort of affected condition, so obviously I try to limit sugar sometimes where I can. As I explained in every video recently, the reason I'm so badly out of breath at the moment is I'm 6 months pregnant, and the baby has not left many room for my organs, so forgive the out of breathness. But let's crack on and get to weighing and to baking. I will make a coordinating blog post for this with the ingredients and the measurements that I use for this recipe, so that you don't necessarily have to write them down as you go along. But let's get cracking. So I'm going to start to weigh out my ingredients. So the first thing you're going to want to do is sieve your flour and obviously baking powder and the sugar, if you are using it, into a bowl. So I'm hoping to make about 12 scones, out of this recipe. And for that, I'm going to need, I'm going to need 450 grams of flour. So I have my empty bowl for measuring and my scales down here. And so I'm just gonna put in 450 grams, or weigh out 450 grams. There we go. And I'm gonna got my sieve and a bowl here. Just gonna put that in. If you were using the caster sugar, you would need approximately 100 grams of caster sugar. I'm gonna put in about a tablespoon of, not quite, like a small tablespoon of baking powder. And then a couple of twists of salt. And I'm gonna sieve this into my bowl. So next I'm gonna measure out the margarine and cut it up in the bowl before I add it into the flour. So for this recipe, you're going to need about 50 grams. I generally do between 50 and 70 grams of margarine for this recipe. So that's the amount of margarine, and I'm going to cut it up into little squares before I add it to the flour mixture. Here is my margarine inside of the flour, the sieved flour. I'm just going to kind of all coat it up, because what we're going to do next is called the rubbing in method. So we're basically going to get our hands and our fingers all dirty and go in with the margarine and basically break it up amongst the flour until we have breadcrumbs. Now there's my margarine all rubbed in. So it looks something akin to white breadcrumbs. Next, before I add my milk, I am going to add in my raisins. Generally you'd add about 160 to 200 grams of raisins. As you can see, I only have a finite amount left, so I'm just going to add the remainder of this bag, which I'm going to guesstimate is about 160. I'm not even going to bother weighing it because it's all I have. I like a good ratio of raisins in my scone. If you only prefer one or two, obviously add a little bit less. Next, we're going to add our milk, and for this we're going to need about 250 to 300 milliliters of milk. I just use what I have in the fridge. I don't buy anything special or particular for this recipe, and we use 1% milk. So I'm going to put in about 250 ml, see how that goes. And if I think it's a little bit dry, I'll add in the extra 50 ml. So I think I just need, maybe a tablespoon or more of milk. So I'm just going to add in a little dash there. So this is what my mixture is looking at now. So I'm going to flour my surface, and as you can see, I have little to no counter space at all. So I actually use my hob as my as counter space. So I'm just going to flour this up, and I'm going to turn my mixture out onto my floured surface. Flour on top, and then I'm going to knead this together. Now that it's kneaded, I'm going to flatten it out. You could use a rolling pin if you want to be about an inch or so thick. So remember before I said one of the important things was the height of your dough before you use your cutter. So this is about an inch, maybe an inch and a half thick. And I have two different size cutters here. I have the large and the medium of my set. And I just find I cut most of them with the large, and just for the remnants and that, the medium is a good one to use. I have a baking sheet with a silicone mat on top. Both are from IKEA. I'm just going to take my large cookie cutter, loosely put it in some of the flour that is on my counter, put it right to the edge and cut it. And then pop it out and place it over there like so. And here's a quick look at them. They are going to go into the oven for about 10 to 15 minutes. So here they are, just out of the oven. Mine baked for 14 minutes at the 220 degrees. They are a perfect golden brown. I forgot to mention that if you wish, you can obviously brush them with either milk or a beaten egg before they go into the oven. I don't bother with that, to be honest, and as you can see, mine are this lovely golden brown, perfect height. You can see they've already started to sort of like split some of them, which I love because it makes them so easy for cutting and adding your favorite toppings. Yum. I can't wait to enjoy, I'll say one, but some of these very, very shortly. My personal favorite topping switches between strawberry jam and fresh strawberries. I'm not a big clotted cream person, so I just put a little bit of butter and either some strawberry jam or some sliced up strawberries on them, and they are divine with coffee, tea, juice, whatever. So let me know in the comments below what your favorite scone topping is. Please give this video a thumbs up. if you liked it. Do subscribe if you like what you see here. And I will see you guys in my next video. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.